Welcome to episode 19 on leadership lessons from across the pond with myself, Julian Roberts, and the wonderful New Yorker, Nancy Halpern. Good to see you, Nancy.
Good to see you, Julian. I'm sorry, I'm sort of sitting here in the dark, but it's beastly hot in New York today.
No, it's fine. You're looking good, as ever.
Thank you. How are you?
Thank you. So today we're talking about, is mental health the employees or the employer's responsibility? And it's an interesting question, and a question I actually posted a LinkedIn poll yesterday, which I didn't quite expect the response I got, actually. I got a lot of views, more than I would normally do. But I got a lot of commentary as well. People comments and really engaging. So it's very thought-provoking. It's very top of mind. And I think on the back of the pandemic, I think mental health is certainly up there, and we need to be sort of mindful of that and aware of that. But actually, the results were interesting, actually. It actually came out at almost a 50-50. So 50% of people saying it's employees, 50% saying employers' responsibility, which I found really interesting. And I don't know what you think, Nancy, and what are your thoughts on this?
Did you have an option that said both?
No, I didn't, actually.
I am very reluctant to engage in forced choice exercises. When it has to be either yes or no, I'm like, well, maybe, why can't I have both? So I guess my first thought is, as usual, a little contrarian. And it's two parts. The first part is, I do think it's a joint responsibility, or at least a symbiotic problem. Because if the employee is suffering, the organization suffers. Yeah. And it's in the organization's best interest, therefore, to help to alleviate that kind of suffering. I think that in the past, though, the resources have been fairly slim. Meaning in this country, I don't know if it's true in the UK, there's something called EAP, Employee Assistance Program, where basically it's an outsourced mental health counselor that you can call on the phone and talk to a couple of times. And that's really great that that resource exists. But I suspect there's going to be a range of mental health issues and concerns, not just for employees, but they're going to be dealing with things for their children, perhaps, and their aged parents. So, I think the answer is it's probably going to be everyone's responsibility. And part of it will come down to money, as these things so often do. Is an organization going to expand the available resources? Will their policy shift in recognition? Will employees be asking for things that they haven't asked for before? I know that you said the results were surprising, and I actually agree with you. That is pretty surprising. What were your thoughts when you saw them?
Well, the reason why I was surprised, because initially I was like you, I think it is a joint responsibility. But then I started to think a bit more about this and whose responsibility is it? And in essence, from a legal perspective, from health and safety, because you have to bring that in, because obviously people are employed under a health and safety sort of regime or policies, whatever. I know you love policies, but they're important. But employers have a duty of care with their employees. So I think initially the responsibility does sit with the employer. And the reason I say that, not just because from a legal perspective, is which means I think employers need to be more on the front foot, more proactive, and need to create that environment to create those conversations and to make people aware. And we'll talk a bit more about what that might be. But also, I was thinking, I've never had mental health problems myself. I'm not aware anyway. So, and I know, I think it's 1 in 4 people do, and it's probably gone up in the last year. So I've been very fortunate for that. But I was thinking, if I had mental health problems, is it difficult to actually think it's your responsibility? Do you know what I mean? Are you in the right frame of mind to actually act and do something about it? I'm all for individuals taking responsibility for their actions and everything else. But I'm just thinking, if you're in that place of a mental health challenge, can you be responsible? You can be responsible, but I mean, can you be aware and take action and do something about it? So that got me thinking where it must be more the employer is the responsibility.
Well, I'm not sure about that because, of course, even the term mental health covers a wide variety of things. If you tend towards depression, for example, which is what I think most people think of at first, or anxiety, those are probably things you've had before. I actually have suffered with depression before. And so it's never really prevented me from working, but there were days I probably canceled appointments because of it. So I do feel that the individual, maybe ownership or responsibility isn't quite the right term because it seems to translate to whose problem is it? Yeah. And so I think, Julian, you're right that sometimes if whatever the issue is, let's say it's depression or anxiety, if it's really taken you, it's very difficult for you to do anything at all. That's true. But you are the one who lives with it. So, part of it is how do you manage it? So then when it does take you, either you're not surprised, you have something to do. But I think that post-COVID, we might also be talking about, do employees feel psychologically safe coming back to an office? And that might mean not just physical space, but even the whole notion of mingling. And I think a lot of companies are acknowledging that's true. In fact, there was just a lead article in today's HBR blog written by a former guest on my podcast, just saying, Timothy Clark, who has written books about psychological.
Oh, he's been on my podcast as well.
He's a popular guy, Tim.
He's a great guy on psychological safety.
Yeah, so he just wrote an article today for HBO about it. And I think there's a lot of leaders who believe that it's only a matter of time. People will feel safe, as in, pardon the pun, they are inoculated to returning. But I don't know. I do think that will be linked to mental health, because one definition of mental health is not whether or not you have an accredited, I think it's called the DMS, disease, but do you feel mentally healthy? Do you feel strong enough, mentally agile enough, flexible? Are you in a learning mode? Mental health is more than just the absence of a condition, right?
Oh, totally. And I think, as we've talked before, the anxiety of going back to the office is probably huge with a lot of people, and that whole transition again. And then also people who are working from home, the anxiety of perhaps missing out. I mean, I think companies have got to wrestle with this psychological safety from every aspect. It's not just the office piece, it's the remote piece as well, isn't it? And trying to make people feel they can share, they can challenge and do all those things that, create a psychologically safe environment. So what do you think organizations or employers can do to create an environment, I guess, that not facilitates mental health? I'm talking about making it acceptable and that people can feel they can share, but also reach out. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that you can actually do both things. And I think employers should be thinking about both creating safe spaces and empathetic leadership for people who are going through a mental health issue. I also think there are things they could do to help build healthy mental states, right? And it's going to be more than just, have a yoga class at noon. Anything that probably scare people right now. And I think we get down to some of the fundamental basics, which are having conversations. You can certainly have someone a little bit more than EAP. You might want to form a group, because part of it is reducing the stigma and the shame that some people feel if they're going through a mental health episode, or they don't want to feel stigmatized by it. So maybe they would join a group. If not, having someone who is on call and not in HR, but really beefing up those services. And I think being creative about what does wellness mean. The term wellness has sadly become somewhat commercialized to mean like buy a candle, right? But, linking, I think, mental health to sort of output, and having outside speakers come in and people can have their video cameras turned off, but really sort of investing a little bit in stuff from the outside. I did a session on burnout 6 months back, and I didn't think we were talking about anything revolutionary, but the feedback to the client was it was such a relief to be able to be in a group and realize they're not the only one. And
and it's nice having those external, isn't it? That somebody who's not part of the company, there's no agenda, and they're going to share their expertise, perhaps do some challenging in a way that they can do, and perhaps provoke people in a way they would. I'm sure you might have been provocative as well. And I think
that's not one of my key flavors.
But and I think that's really valid. I think it's having that almost that open conversations, isn't it? Making it's normalizing this, that it's okay, and I think it's got a lot more normalized, certainly in the UK, in terms of we have Mental Health Week, it's quite openly talked about, but it goes back to those, as you say, almost those basics of conversations, real conversations, and not just saying to somebody, how are you, and just wait for them to say, oh, I'm fine, they're moving on, right, okay, can you do this? It's actually, no, how are you? And almost stopping them and almost putting the brakes on and saying, Nancy, how are you today? And it's putting in a point in time where people go, do you know what? I'm not feeling great, actually, or I'm a bit stressed about this, or whatever it is, and having those conversations. And I think it comes on leaders, really, because I know we've talked before, HR tends to become the gurus of where people go to for mental health. And I think that's sort of wrong, really. I think leaders should be proactive and almost could take this off the pass before it even gets to HR by having some really good conversations, really open, transparent, genuine, meaningful listening conversations where things can be talked out. Because sometimes just talking it out can really help, can't it? It can really just getting it off your chest. And actually it doesn't feel as bad as perhaps it was bad in my head when I shared it.
There's a reason we call this leadership lessons, right? And not HR lessons. I mean, my dream scenario would be to have everyone on that leadership team, everyone in the C-suite who has ever suffered or had someone in their life suffered, at a town hall say, I want to stand right up here and say,
yes,
that I've been medicated for anxiety, or my kid really struggled, or my mom was bipolar, or whatever, or I've seen the impact of this in my own life. And I want you to know that we run a business, but we also run an organization. And there is room to be talented and yet. And we want to be that kind of organization. And I am holding every one of my directs, who will hold their directs, accountable for making this an environment where this is a safe topic to talk about and to know that we support you. Because, one of my favorite leadership expressions is a fish rots from the head. I may have told you that before, but, it may sound very trite to people, but I don't think that you and I can overemphasize that when a CEO speaks, he or she is not speaking as Barry or Linda. They are speaking as the CEO. And there's an amplifying effect of what they say, just like people interpret a CEO's suggestions as a directive. So, frankly, I think this is a gauntlet. What kind of leader do you want to be for the balance of 2021 and 2022? What is it going to take to make, as my friend Julia would say, your organization thrive? And how are you going to measure the success of achieving that? And if you think that empathetic leadership was just sort of a nice pat on the head during lockdown, you may be surprised to discover that you created an expectation from your people that you actually care about them. And if you suddenly act in ways that indicate just the opposite, you may be looking at some pretty significant talent gaps.
Yeah, no, I agree. And you touched on it. Well, you didn't touch on it. You went straight into it on about being that sort of vulnerability. And I think it's that creating that meaningful story, that meaningful reality of, not making stories up if you've not suffered things, clearly, being genuine about it, or using examples of somebody else. But I think that creates that transparency that then starts to breed more vulnerability of people stepping out. If the CEO or this leader is sharing about this, then it's okay to do that here. It's okay. They've set the ceiling, they set the sort of temperature, and that's what leadership's all about: setting the temperature, setting the sort of sense of what you can do and can't do around here. And as always, we've run right out of time. Interesting conversation. I think a conversation we'll probably have again and again as we proceed throughout the post sort of pandemic. Thank everybody for listening. Good to see you again, Nancy, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Bye.